Welcome back to another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Glad to be here as always as well here on a Wednesday in the middle of the week once again, getting that much closer to another Indiana football game day. And I mean, this time it really is game day, right? With ESPN's College Game Day coming to town. We're going to find out who the guest picker is going to be, I believe, tomorrow. So that's exciting stuff. We may even get into that a little bit later, just speculating who some of the folks may be. Maybe not. Maybe we will. I do mention a little bit with our man, Alec Lasley. It's a very small portion of the conversation, but we may or may not explore it a bit further. But how you guys doing? Welcome in. I'm feeling good here on a Wednesday. Hope you're feeling good as well. Hopefully you're enjoying your week. I certainly am. I'm looking forward to doing the show here with you again today. Excuse me. I mentioned Alec Lasley coming on with us, as always, on Wednesday. We also bringing in Jeffrey the Greek. I was able to get him a little earlier than usual. Normally when he comes on, we stick him on Fridays, but we're going to be bringing him on today as well to talk about not only the Hoosiers, but really get his thoughts on what the rest of the Big Ten looks like in general, because he's somebody, if you've seen any of his segments before or listened to his podcast, the Eyes on Big podcast, you know he follows every team very closely. He'll be able to give a good overhead view of the rest of the conference and really just kind of give us an idea of where Indiana stacks up truly against the rest of the teams, because yeah, we've seen how the Hoosiers look against the guys that they have played, but there's a significant number of teams that they won't face this year unless, they happen to face one of them in the Big Ten title game. Oregon, for example, Penn State. We won't see what this Hoosier team looks like against that caliber of an opponent. We will see them face Ohio State, of course, but there are a number of Indiana teams, of Big Ten teams that Indiana will not face this year. And that's just the nature of the having 18 teams in 9 conference games, and you being one of those 18 teams that you're going to miss 8, if I'm not mistaken. You won't play 8 teams, and I'm sure that will cycle through as you play more of these seasons. And who knows how long this ends up being an 18 team conference. Maybe it ends up being more down the road. As it feels like the Big Ten and the SEC are always having secret little conversations because they know they're the big dogs of college sports, college football, really, if we're being specific about it. So it wouldn't surprise me if this 18-team league a few years down the road becomes something even bigger than that. I honestly would hope it stays this way. It's because, expansion's fun. And obviously we're seeing Indiana reap the benefits of it right now because they're no longer in the Big Ten East. They get more of you could say it's a balanced schedule, but, it's still one of the easier ones when compared to some of the other schools. But they've had one of the consistently hardest schedules in the Big Ten year in and year out because they played in the Big Ten East, and that's no longer a burden for them. So it has been advantageous for the Hoosiers. So we'll talk more football specifically with Alec and, of course, Jeffrey the Greek. But there is one thing that I want to throw in real quick before we move on. I'm going to move into a couple of quick hitters, and then we'll pull in Alec Lasley and then get on with the rest of the show. But one thing that I'm sure is on everybody's mind is the health of Curtis Rourke, and more specifically his hand. I don't want to make it seem like he has some sort of major health issue, because that's, of course, not the case. The big deal is with his throwing hand. And not that that's not major, of course. He did have to have surgery on his thumb. And it is going to keep him out from this week's game against Washington. But here is what Pete Thamel posted on Twitter, or X, yesterday in regards to an update with the injury for Curtis Rourke. He says, Indiana quarterback Curtis Rourke underwent surgery on his injured right thumb on Monday, per ESPN sources that helped provide some clarity on a potential return, including optimism that he could be back for Indiana's game at Michigan State on November 2nd. So, of course, that is massive, huge news. Huge, massive news, however else you want to phrase it. I'm sure that was, what do they call that? A double whammy or something? That's probably not what it is. Just double downing on one specific adjective, right? That's very good news. If you're Indiana, or if you're a fan, if you're a player, coach, whatever, you want to see your guy who has been, largely responsible for, being one of the better game managers, really in the history of Indiana football, for being quite honest, definitely in recent history of Indiana football. but one of the best, most calm, cool, collected quarterbacks, I would say, in the entire country. So having somebody back potentially after missing only one game, and again, this isn't confirmed, it's just what they're kind of predicting. That's probably best case scenario for the situation. And again, I'm in the same camp as Kurt Signetti, and maybe this is just me drinking the successful Kool-Aid that Indiana's had, but I believe Taven Jackson's going to come in this weekend and perform well against Washington. And here's the thing, performing well for Taven Jackson doesn't mean he has to put up astronomical numbers. What he really needs to do is kind of be a similar version of Curtis Rourke. And I'm not talking numbers, but like just be poised, be calm, make good decisions. You don't have to make the home run throw. You just have to sit out there and manage the game to the best of your ability and limit your mistakes as much as you can. And I think if you do that, Indiana has enough weapons around Taven Jackson and the quarterback's room in general that there's excuse me, that there's a lot, like there's not as much pressure on Taven Jackson is what I'm trying to say. And so if he does the simple things correctly, it feels like the rest of everything else will fall into place because you have a myriad of good wide receivers. You have a strong, really strong run game between really all four of your main running backs. And I know in close game situations, you won't always see the entirety of the Ninja Turtles as they've been deemed. You won't see all of them take as many snaps. But I mean, between the two main backs, Tyson Lawton and Justice Ellison, I believe those running backs, along with the offensive line, are more than capable of helping out Taven Jackson as they try to pick apart the Washington defense this Saturday. So I'm excited to see that. And by the way, one other thing, I've heard every announcer say Tyson Lawton's name differently. I've heard Tyson Lawton, of course, Tyson, as I refer to it as. I heard Gus Johnson say Tyshawn. So I don't know how the hell to say his name. And I don't know if Kurt Signetti said his name very often. But I hate whenever this is like the Khalil Ware situation all over again, where it just seems like it's impossible to figure out how to say a dude's name. And as somebody, that's one thing I tend to obsess over sometimes. I love to have the correct pronunciation of a player's name or anybody's name. Doesn't even have to be a player. Just because it's, in this business, you want to at least sound like you know what you're talking about, right? So, but I'm going to keep saying Tyson. I feel like that's the most frequent way that I've heard it. So, yeah, Indiana running back Tyson Lawton. Also this weekend, the Red Outs for Washington. That is something that is exciting because it feels like any other time that Indiana football has tried to do a insert color here out, it's looked like nonsense. Like last year when they did the blackout, whenever they did the ghost uniforms against Akron, there was, I hate to say there was hardly anybody in the stands, but that was a joke of something to do. There is no reason to do an out type of game unless the stadium is going to be close to full or at capacity, which Indiana will fortunately have for the remaining of the season. And it will provide opportunities to do stuff like this in the future. The rest, for the rest of the home games, Michigan and, of course, Purdue. So very exciting to, see the sellout with Washington. And hopefully, again, I'm sure it'll look magnificent on camera this weekend. And I just hope that Indiana puts in another great performance and keeps marching toward, their goals for the season, getting to the Big Ten title game, getting to the 12-team college football playoff, and hopefully setting maybe a program record for, a largest attendance maybe this weekend. Who knows? So we'll see. Very exciting times. Another thing that is exciting that I'll talk a little bit more about, with Alec, is Braylon Mullen's decision tonight at 6. I know Indiana basketball fans on their they're chomping at the bit, I should say, to get somebody else in that freshman recruiting class. And you have Trent Sisley already, and that's a big piece, but you definitely want to find at least room for at least one more freshman, I think. And whether that's somebody like Braylon Mullins or even a Bryson Tiller, you got to find a way to seal the deal on one of those guys. And if you can get both, hats off to you. You're probably done looking at your recruiting class for next year. But yeah, Braylon Mullins will announce where he's going between Indiana, UConn, and UNC tonight at 6. I believe it's on 24/7 Sports, their network. Yeah, so that's on YouTube. You can live stream that if you want. And we'll react to all of that on Friday, whether or not he goes to Indiana. So keep an eye on that tonight. One thing I didn't mention on Monday, and it's really not even that big of a deal, it's just something that I've made content for myself, and that is with my betting results. And I know I'm sure some of you who do follow along, like you were curious, and that's fine. I had a good weekend in terms of the amount of picks that I guessed correctly. I believe I was 5 for 7 when it comes to the amount of things I listed out on the weekend, but I didn't parlay them correctly, unfortunately. I did Louisville money line parlayed with Illinois money line, and of course Louisville did not win, so that didn't hit for me. And then I did a 5-legger with the other games I mentioned, and everything else hit except for what was it, Washington State? No. It was California. I had them covering against NC State, and they didn't even win the game. So unfortunate. But again, we'll keep riding along. And I know some of you all do not care about the betting picks, and that's totally fine. That's just something I like to do because it's something that I enjoy doing. And we'll try again on Friday. I did hit some NFL bets though, so that made up for it. I hit Steelers money line, and then I had 2 covers. I think I had the Bills and the Bengals covering for me on Sunday. So we made up for it with the NFL, which usually I feel like if I have one good week with college football, I don't have, or it's the opposite for the NFL when it comes to betting. So, all right, we'll continue. We'll get on the other side. We're going to get into our double dose of guest segments right here. We're going to have Alec Lasley and then Jeffrey the Greek join us both to talk about Indiana football. And of course, we'll get into some Indiana basketball stuff with Alec as well. Hoosier hysteria happened this past weekend. We have the recruits that I mentioned, Bryson Tiller and Braylon Mullins, with some news to talk about. And then, of course, the charity scrimmage coming up this Sunday. We'll talk about that with Alec Lasley. And, of course, all things Indiana and Big Ten football with Alec and Jeffrey the Greek as well. And when we come back from those segments, I'll read your YouTube comments, go over the non-revenue sports, maybe talk a little NBA. Actually, I'll go and mention this now because I don't want to talk NBA at the moment. But the NBA is back. And Pacers had a wonderful year last year. They're going to be looking to, bounce or what's the word I'm looking for? Piggyback off of what they did last year and continue to make strides forward. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm going to reach out to a couple of people. One of them is our very own Drew Rosenberg. Going to maybe do some NBA segments with him on the show moving forward. And then I'm also planning to reach out potentially to Pacers beat writer Tyler Smith, just to have somebody to check in with on the Pacers now and again. And I'll let you know, if any of that comes to fruition, I'm able to get any of that scheduled. I'm sure I'll be able to get one of those guys to chat some NBA stuff with moving forward. Just want to let you guys know about that. So yeah, we'll get into our guest segments. I'll go through your YouTube comments a little bit later, then do some non-revenues, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So let's get things rolling here with our man, Mr. Alec Lasley of HoosierIllustrated.com. Joining me once again here on a Wednesday is the publisher of HoosierIllustrated.com, Mr. Alec Lasley. How you doing, sir?
Good, John. How you doing?
I am doing just fine. A lot of things to be excited about here in Bloomington. Not that I'm in Bloomington, but that is, I guess the market that I'm in charge of covering, if you will, with Indiana football. Taking care of business once again this past Saturday. Indiana basketball on the rise, at least when it comes to, the beginning of the season. Not so far from now. You had Hoosier Hysteria this past Friday. You also have the charity exhibition coming up this weekend against Tennessee. So, and then you got Braylon Mullins' decision tonight. Whether or not that ends up being Indiana, we'll have to wait and see. But a lot of things that Indiana fans are keeping their eyes on right now.
No, absolutely. You're starting to get into the official crossover season, right, of football and basketball, which doesn't typically. We touched on it last week, but it doesn't typically happen for Indiana fans. But you're now finally getting that with not only the excitement around football, but you're starting to get into a lot of decisions for college basketball prospects, right, and a lot of the class of 2025 kids who are making their announcements. And obviously, slowly but surely getting into the start of the regular season, which is, today's the 23rd, so 2 weeks.
Under a couple of weeks, aren't we?
Yeah, 2 weeks, and we're there, and you still get the sprinkle of the charity exhibitions, which super fun to actually have those televised this year. I know over the past couple of years, those have been relatively quiet in terms of network television. So cool to get those, regardless of kind of what the result is for any team to get some college basketball back on TVs.
I do want to start with football because, I mean, believe it or not, maybe this is just me in my own head, but I feel like right now, specifically with Indiana, and this is definitely a rare case, but Indiana football is the headline right now when it comes to what's going on at IU and in Bloomington, just because they are doing so many things that are unprecedented. You have now, you're 7-0. You've sold out the rest of your home slate. You have a legitimate chance to not only make the Big Ten title game if you can keep up what you're doing, but with that will more than likely come a shot at the, or not even a shot, but participation in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. So, I mean, one thing I said earlier this week and a little bit last week is that at this point, now that you've seen what they can do against Nebraska, a lot of your opponents are similar caliber, in my opinion, to Nebraska, with the exception of maybe an Ohio State. So the sky is pretty much the limit for this Indiana team. And I know that things are going to look a little bit different this weekend when you have Taven Jackson under center, but you did get a bit of a glimpse of that during the second half when Indiana faced the Cornhuskers this past Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the biggest question mark now. You know, everything was going according to plan, if not, much better through that first half last week. And I think a lot of people were definitely on edge through the majority of that second half. It's interesting though. I talked to a lot of people that may have been kind of tuning in and out of the game periodically just because of the score, and didn't even realize that Taven Jackson was in, which was interesting. And one that just shows you, right, the ability to I don't want to say a system quarterback, because Curtis Rourke has shown that he's anything but a system quarterback this year, with how good he has played and how effective he's been and efficient he's been, and some of those massive explosive plays that he's been able to put together for Indiana. But on the flip side, there is a very legitimate system, scheme, and a very consistent offense that has come over from JMU, come over from Elon, right? Wherever all of these coaches have been together from for quite some time, whether it's the quarterback room with Tino Sinceri, whether it's the offensive play calling, right, with Mike Shanahan, or the actual messaging that's being portrayed from Kurt Cignetti, right? Those three are very, very much in tandem and very consistent with everything that Indiana is doing offensively. And so to sub in Taven Jackson, still really not lose much of a beat, just shows you, one, the development that Taven Jackson's had. I think that's been critical, and I think everyone can agree that there has been true development in such a short period of time since the staff got on campus. But also the ability to look at the players around Taven Jackson now. He doesn't need to go out and win games. He doesn't necessarily need to be a game manager, right? He's probably still going to have to make some throws in order to move the ball down the field, in order to beat Washington this week. But he by no means has to stretch himself to try to win this game. And there's so many playmakers on the outside. There's so many playmakers in the backfield. This offensive line has done a phenomenal job up to this point. I think you're going to see a little bit of a flip in how they run their offense. And that's going to be probably a little bit more of a run first, then pass second, and really, buy in a lot more to the RPO and the play action. But I think it's going to be interesting on the flip side too, because you have a much better running quarterback in Taven Jackson, and kind of how maybe some of those RPOs or those play actions are truly drawn up. If it's going to be more of a, hey, this is going to be a pull first and then maybe a run second, depending on your read. Whereas it was typically the opposite with Curtis Rourke when it comes to his reads and some of those play actions and RPOs.
And I think based on what you're talking about, it wouldn't surprise me if you see the Washington defense kind of sell out by really focusing heavily on defending the run game and forcing Taven Jackson to make some plays, just because he's going to be in a position that he hasn't been in. I mean, yeah, he did come in and make some really good throws against Nebraska, but of course that was with a massive lead. You're going to be responsible for not only breaking a 0-0 tie this week, but I mean, if you're going to be responsible for, carrying the team all the way through to the end of the game this week, and hopefully managing to keep that unbeaten record going on and all that type of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of added stuff that Taven Jackson has not experienced this year in particular. Not to say he hasn't experienced it at all throughout his career, because he did start a few games last year for Indiana, most notably the Louisville game where they were down 21-0 at halftime, but was able to execute somewhat of a comeback before ultimately falling short with that goal line stand. So a lot of
Yeah, and
go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I totally agree, right? This is going to be a much different scenario than what we've seen him this year, right? Because he does have to be from start to finish the guy. And there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, I would think, in this game. I think, though, the fact that regardless of kind of when Curtis Rourke comes back, right, there's a lot of reports about when that timeline is going to actually be. The fact that this is a home game is going to shift everything, right, in Taven Jackson's side of the field here, and create a little bit more momentum for him. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do if they win the coin toss. If they want to go on offense first and kind of get him some confidence early on, because we've seen a little bit of both with Kurt Signetti, but he's been very aggressive in trying to do that. And I think if you do that, right, that just creates even more momentum for that defense, for Taven Jackson, the second possession and everything like that. But you got to be happy that this is a home game and not a true road game to kind of get things going for however long he's going to be under center the rest of this year.
And speaking of home games, this is, of course, another big one. But you had Big Noon last week. You now have ESPN's College Game Day crew coming to town. And I know they haven't announced the guest picker. And we've had numerous people, kind of be thrown around on who that might end up being. And I don't know if this is the most realistic option necessarily. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But one thing that Mitchell and I were talking about that wouldn't surprise us is them going with Trace Jackson Davis as the guest picker, simply because you have the added factor that Taven is the starter this week. And it'd be interesting to have that dynamic with Trace being, of course, a mega star with Indiana basketball now in the NBA, and getting to kind of, just have that moment. It's not necessarily the exact same thing that you get with, like, a LeBron and Bronny that you saw last night with the NBA, but you do have that, brotherly connection between, of course, Trace and Taven.
Yeah, it'll be tough for him. I know they play, I think, a 9:30 game on Friday. Who knows, right? If he can make it, he's going to do everything that he can to make it. It's going to be a quick turnaround, obviously, but it'll be interesting. It'd be cool to see Antoine Randall. With typically having Saturdays, theoretically off, right, with the NFL. It'll be interesting. I know a lot of names. People have thrown around Mark Cuban. People have thrown around a lot of different potential names, and I think it's one that you truly don't know, because one, Indiana's never been in this situation before, but two, especially when you relate it back to the football side of things,
yes,
right? There aren't a lot of huge names that would be a huge star power kind of a name for a game day atmosphere. So that's why I think it opens up the discussion a lot wider when it comes to this. But it would be super cool. It would have been cool. I think Joe Buck said that it's not going to end up being him, but you never know with Joe Buck, right? He could,
it's almost like Joe Buck back when
directions.
he made that shout out on I don't remember which NFL game he was calling. It's almost like he was kind of pleading initially whenever he was mentioning that, when he shouted out Indiana football, that if that opportunity were to arise, like, hey, I'm here, I'm paying attention, I'd love to be on game. And I'm not making fun of him. I'm agreeing that would have been cool to see him on there, of course.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I think a lot of people are excited for that. But yeah, the crowds are going to be ginormous. It was very large last week for the Fox Noon kickoff, and the pregame that they had there. So I just to imagine what it's going to be like for this type of atmosphere. I've never seen Bloomington that popping at 7:30, 8 a.m. last week. And
that's the thing. It feels like all of these. Indiana's had one night game this year, right? It was their Friday night against Western Illinois, but everything else. Well, actually, that's not true because they had UCLA on the road, and that's technically, I guess, by Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah,
it is a night game. But other than that, they've done nothing but play at noon, and so it's almost part of this team's identity now to to get things up and rolling bright and early and playing these noon kicks.
Yeah, and I think you're right when you bring it back to the Washington game. Obviously, a team coming two time zones away, actually three, right, and coming to Eastern time. That's going to be a very early kick for them. They've struggled in their two road games. They just got
Got hammered by
they had,
Iowa 2 weeks ago. I think
they
they
had
had the
week last
bye.
week,
This
bye week
they
this
didn't play
past week.
last week.
But yeah, got hammered by Iowa. Looked really bad and struggled in that Rutgers game a few weeks ago, but obviously had the big win, or at least some of that momentum that they did carry into that Iowa game that obviously faltered, but over Michigan. But that was at home, so it's a team that has a lot of different question marks with them. Will Rogers has done a very good job of being kind of that guy for them at the quarterback position. The transfer from Kansas State, so we'll see kind of where he's at, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of where they fall this week in the team that has been very inconsistent for the majority of this year.
And it could be another opportunity. And I think this is exactly what Kurt Cignetti would want to do what he's done all season long, and that's get off to a fast start, score a couple of touchdowns, or I mean, I'm not saying they have to be up 14-0 by the end of the first quarter, but if they can do what they've done all season, and that's get off to fast starts, I mean, that seems like it's been a really good recipe so far to really getting your team confident and comfortable for the rest of the game. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on Washington. We know they don't do well, as on the road in those types of situations. So it seems like, I mean, I don't want to say the game will be decided early on if you do that, but it seems like that will be a very crucial way to get off to yet another potential fast start and do what you've done all year long, which is be the only team left in the FBS level that is not allowed a single first quarter touchdown, which that is an insane stat. On top of the fact that they are one of two teams.
First quarter
That's what
points,
I meant to say. Yeah. Points. They had 0 points in the first quarter. Just didn't word it correctly. And not only that, you're one of two teams to never trail, the other one being Army. And, I mean, it's just weird. It's weird to be saying all these things. Not to say that we didn't, at least, I think whenever we talked at the beginning of the year about the potential for Indiana to get off to a decent start like this, and I say decent, I mean, this is insane. I think we knew that they would look good doing so if that were the case, but I don't think the level of dominance is something that anybody expected from this Indiana team.
Yeah, and just I think I said Will Rogers from Kansas State, actually Mississippi State. I got confused with
Howard.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm from Mississippi State, but anyway, yeah, I mean the pure dominance that this team has had, and there's so many different stats that you can throw out, right? But I think the biggest thing is the ability to start fast and then to finish strong. Two aspects of this team that has really, really not been there for the majority of the past 4, 5, 6 years, right? They had flashes of that, and maybe from game to game, they had certain aspects of getting off to quick starts or maybe finishing a little bit stronger than what we're used to. But that's not the case with this year. This year, they consistently do that in both aspects. And I think that shows with, I think the numbers are 80-0 advantage, right, in the first quarter. And then I think it's 94-17 in the fourth quarter. So you look at those two numbers, right? That's astronomical. And that shows why they're winning so many games, but why they're winning so many games by a wide margin. And that's something that you just don't typically associate with an Indiana team. But that shows you, again, how consistent they've been in the two biggest areas of the game, right? The very beginning and the very end. And that's what's been kind of the backbone for this team are those quick starts and then those really, really strong finishes to make sure that any sort of momentum that a team has kind of going into the fourth or maybe midway through the fourth is pretty much put to bed and put to rest there whenever they have the opportunity to do so.
I know we've talked a lot of football. I do want to transition over to basketball while we've still got a few minutes. Braylon Mullins, of course, making his decision later tonight, whether or not it's going to be Indiana, UConn, or UNC. If I'm not mistaken, I do feel like things have been fairly quiet when it comes to just where things may end up. And I do know there's probably a lean one way or another, but what's kind of your read on what may happen with Braylon Mullins?
Yeah, and it seems like it's been kind of back and forth between Indiana and UConn for what may be probably the last month. he kind of got things really going in his recruitment with his UConn visit, which seems like forever ago at this point. Obviously had his Indiana visit with Trent Sicily on campus and Eric Reeb, right? The big recruiting weekend for Indiana. As of now, right? I mean, things have been relatively quiet. Things seem to have been pushed more to the UConn side over the last kind of week and a half, 2 weeks, and I think that's hard to really bet against at this point, because exactly what that offense is going to look like. How guards are used in that system. How shooters are used in that system, and that they have a very, very consistent blueprint of what winning looks like, and especially what personalities match well with Dan Hurley. With Indiana, you have kind of a vision of what this offense could be, but there's been no tape to show what this offense is going to be. Right? It's supposed to be vastly different, and you can show all you want, right, in practice. And Braylon Mullins has taken numerous visits to Indiana and seen numerous highlights of what that offense theoretically could look like. He's also seen numerous practices of kind of what the offense is going to look like. But unless you actually put it into a game setting against a true opponent, it's very difficult to actually 100% visualize that. And I think that's unfortunately going to be, I think, the biggest factor in this decision is just you don't have a true visualization of what this Indiana offense is going to be, and you clearly have that, and it's clearly worked. It's not like this offense and this system hasn't worked for UConn over the past 2 years, especially at the guard position. And so I think that's what ultimately is going to kind of move that in the Huskies' favor when he does make that announcement later on today.
And there is one more Indiana target that has set a decision date, and that is Bryson Tiller, 5-star Bryson Tiller, who's decided he's going to commit on November 10th, deciding between Indiana, Auburn, Georgia Tech, and Kansas. Any idea where that may stand right now?
Yeah, so this has been an interesting one to kind of follow, a guy kind of very similar to Bryson Tucker, the 2024 5-star that Indiana got. That it's pretty much flown under the radar from a national perspective. A very, very talented, consensus 5-star recruit here, but one that typically doesn't play much on the AAU circuit. Plays for Overtime Elite, right? So not the traditional sense of a high school prospect. Obviously, you're seeing a lot more high schoolers kind of make that transition to Overtime Elite, but a guy who's been there for the majority of his high school career here over the past couple of seasons, and one that typically doesn't do a lot of interviews, and that's because he's not really out there for the vast majority of the summers. So a name that a lot of Indiana fans may have kind of heard about, but may not know a ton about. Kind of a hybrid forward, super athletic, but 6'9", so kind of matches up a little bit with Trent Sicily, but a guy who can do a little bit more, not only around the basket as kind of a true power forward, but one that's just a little bit more skilled at this kind of stage in his career. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he has been down at Overtime Elite, kind of going with and training with a lot of those top players around the country, and getting a lot more of that kind of hands-on training. But Kansas is one that's been school to very much follow in this recruitment. Indiana is firmly in the mix here, and Georgia Tech kind of has wouldn't say a true kind of hometown pull here, but Damon Stoudemire's done a phenomenal job getting a lot of really good talent in his program over the last 2 years since he took over. So one name to not really totally throw out of the mix here would do wonders for that program. But I think Indiana has a really good shot here. They need to bolster up a lot of that front court, because there's the expectation, right, that they're going to lose a lot from that front court after this season. And you need guys who can come in right away and play. And he's a guy that could come in right away and make an impact. So obviously some time before, a couple weeks before he makes that decision, but a name to definitely keep in mind from an Indiana perspective.
Yeah, definitely going to be interesting to watch both these decisions, just because, I mean, you don't want to see the position you were in last year. Of course, we've talked about numerous times where you just have one guy going into the season in your freshman class. And I know that Woodson did, I mean, everything he was supposed to do in the offseason to rectify that, but you don't want to put yourself in that position in the first place. So it will be, I mean, there will be heavy reaction, I'm sure, if Indiana does not find a way to land at least one of these players. So we'll definitely be watching that, and we'll definitely react to what happens with Braylon Mullins on Friday's show, and go from there. Last thing, any expectations from the charity scrimmage coming up this weekend? And I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's more about putting out there a little bit of that expectation of what this offense is actually going to look like, playing with a little bit consistency and cohesiveness from an offensive perspective. Obviously, didn't see a whole bunch at the scrimmage from Hoosier Hysteria, but saw some really nice highlights in terms of the ability to push the ball. They definitely were trying to get up and down the floor a lot at a lot quicker pace than in previous years, and you saw that by multiple guys being able to take the rebound and just go. And so I think you're going to see that. You're probably going to see a little bit more of a higher turnover rate probably on Sunday, but I think that's to be expected. But I think that's also to be expected because one, right, just a lot of new faces playing together, for the first time in a true kind of game setting, but also because I think they really, and I hope they do, but they really need to show that they're going to push the ball a lot more. And Tennessee is going to get up in your face and guard you, 94 feet. So it's going to be interesting and a really good test to see kind of what this backcourt is with Miles Rice, obviously Cannon Carlisle. We'll see what happens with Trey Galloway. We'll see if he plays. I'm going to expect that he doesn't. There's no reason to really put him out there and give him maybe an extra week and a half of rest before true games fully get going. But will be interesting to see what that backcourt does in a true game like setting on Sunday.
Alec, I appreciate your time as always, and great insight, of course, and look forward to doing this again next week. Hopefully we're still talking about an unbeaten Indiana football team.
Absolutely, John. I appreciate it.
Good stuff from Alec Lasley, as always. Going to continue to check in with him each and every Wednesday as long as he's available, and I appreciate his time as always. Moving forward, let's bring in our man, Jeffrey the Greek of the Eyes on Big podcast. Going to talk all things Indiana football, Big Ten football, and really just figure out from an outsider's perspective, what is the ceiling for this Indiana football team? So without further ado, Mr. JTG from the Eyes on Big podcast. Joining us now from the Eyes on Big podcast, it is the only Jeffrey the Greek. So glad to have you back, and I'm so glad that I have you on here, and we're talking about an Indiana football team that is, in fact, undefeated. To me, they look the part, and I know everybody loves to talk about the easy schedule, but they still dominate, and I want to talk a lot of big picture stuff with you here today. But first of all, glad to have you. It's been a few weeks, and this is going to be fun as always.
This is awesome. Reminds me of the 2021 season when Indiana was winning games. Hoosier football fans are some of my favorite Big Ten football fans because they don't expect big things. So when it happens, y'all are the happiest humans on the planet for your football team. So it's fun to even 5% enjoy the ride with you.
So just off the top, just one thing we talked about at the very beginning, you and I, and you did it on your podcast too. You went through the schedule and you threw out the scenario that there were so many coin flip games early on that if things were going well, that they could indeed be in this position that they're in now. The biggest difference I feel like is I don't think anybody expected them to just look the part as much as they actually have.
No, it's funny because when Indiana was 3-0 and 4-0, I broke my arm multiple times, patting myself on the back, saying to people that I've been on the Hoosier train before everyone. However, I went back and looked at my predictions. I had you at 6-6. So at some point, I'm like, if I was on the train, I was on the caboose, and I hate to use trains with, excuse me, but with the Hoosiers, but it's even gone beyond what I had thought. Now, when Jordan and I, JW Eggleston 7, my podcast partner, when we broke down the Hoosiers in our team previews preseason, what I was trying to challenge our listeners to, and maybe Jordan a little bit, is look at this Hoosier schedule. You're into October, you're late October. There are no games on here that auto losses for the Hoosiers. That's what the message that I was trying to get across. With that being said, law of averages would say, through the first 7 games, maybe I could see 5-2, something like that. To actually think to be 7-0 and to be at this point ranked this high, even me as a non-Hoosier but Hoosier supporter, I didn't even give you guys enough credit. It's absolutely mind-boggling what Siggy has done and how this fan base has responded.
And I guess moving forward, obviously a big game with Washington this weekend. There's going to be a different dynamic this week specifically because we're going to see how they play with Taven Jackson. And not that we haven't gotten the Taven Jackson flavor before, whether it be some this season and even a little bit last year whenever Tom Allen was flipping and flopping between him and Brendan Sorsby. It is going to be interesting to see what he's able to do whenever there's actual pressure on him, because every situation that Taven's been in this year specifically, it's when the result's no longer in doubt. Indiana's already taken care of business. So I think if there's any worry with this week specifically, and if anyone who's paid attention to the Rourke injury, a lot of people are at least expecting that, like, for sure, you're not going to see him this week. You may not see him next week either, but I think past the Michigan State game, there's no doubt that unless something else happens after the fact, there's no reason Curtis Rourke shouldn't return by that point.
Yeah, I like the only real worries this weekend are the proverbial reading your own headlines deal. Feels like Siggy is pretty good at stamping that shit out pretty quick. He doesn't let that happen. And then, but you always have that a little bit. These are still 18 to 23-year-old, young humans that are susceptible. And then, the Taven Jackson, Curtis Rourke thing. Let me just say, I feel horrible for Curtis Rourke. I hate injuries every time they come, even to my rivals. This one even bugs the heck out of me because I think I've said, when you and I have talked and on the podcast, I've been a fan of Curtis Rourke since the Maction days. Dude's won me some money. Like, it was like a secret that nobody knew how good this guy was. So I would take overs and his team to cover all the time because Curtis Rourke was such a baller. He fights to get a name for himself in Maction, is brought over to the Big Ten, dominates, or just plays really well in the Big Ten. Now his stage is getting bigger, game days in town, and you get hit with an injury. It's just a shot to the gut for him and his family, and everybody else that's helped him get to this point. So I feel horrible for the guy. With that being said, it's not like Taven Jackson isn't a great athlete. I think maybe it would be a skosh different offense that we see. And in a potentially really charmed season, maybe this winds up being a good thing in that now there's a little bit different offense for teams have to prepare for, as Taven Jackson might use his legs a little bit more, might even lean heavier into the RPO a little bit more because they're not the same quarterback. No human beings are ever the same quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see, but a real glass half full is maybe this winds up being another blessing in disguise for the Hoosiers.
What do you kind of see as maybe, and I know at least I've thrown around as the ceiling, and maybe the ceiling's extended a little bit more, but early on when things were going well for Indiana, we started throwing out if things really go their favor the rest of the way and they're able to continue to execute, 11-1 isn't out of the question. It's almost expected, especially if you can get past this week with Taven Jackson at quarterback and bring back Curtis Rourke healthy the rest of the way. The fact that is the expectation potentially is almost insane. I mean, and then if you are undefeated going into that Ohio State game towards the end of the year, that becomes, a game that nobody ever expected it to be. With the stakes on the line potentially at that point. And I know maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but at the same time, we are at that point in the year where you have to start looking at those types of things.
It's funny, before the season, everybody's projecting who gets into the college football playoff, who are the teams from each conference that are the best chances to get in the college football playoff. Everybody's, of course, throwing out Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, and Iowa. Well, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are still in it. Michigan and Iowa gone. Well, nobody. And then everybody just thought, well, there's nobody out there that could take the place of any of these teams should they falter. Or maybe Indiana and Illinois might be able to, because Illinois is in the running too. I don't think they'll beat Oregon, but if they should beat Oregon, look at their schedule. They're darn near a shoe-in for the playoffs. Even at 10-2, they would be a possibility for the playoffs. Even at 10-2, Indiana would be a possibility for the playoffs, but we would be looking at schedule situations and win qualities. But with that being said, 11-1 is very much on the table for Indiana, and I would go so far as to say Indiana is 11-1. They're in the college football playoffs, especially if it's a 11-1 with a 9-point loss to Ohio State. I don't think there's more that you need at that point. Like they would be in, and it would be an absolute travesty if they didn't. And in fact, it's an absolute travesty where they're ranked right now. They should be in the top 10. It's BS that I don't like the number that you're at right now. Bad, juju with that. I'll throw it out there because I'm not a Hoosier fan, but they should be higher right now. So hopefully as the wins stack up, a couple more teams drop down, Indiana would move high enough up in the rankings that even if there is a step back or two, it would still get you guys high enough to be in the college football playoffs.
There's a number of things, and I ranted about this earlier, and it's the fact that there are so many factors holding Indiana back from having a better ranking. First of all, you're Indiana. That's part of the factor. They assume that every win you're getting is because the other team is significantly worse than you. That's the first part. Second thing, you don't have that SEC logo on your jersey, and so you don't have that extra brand bump. And really just replace the name Indiana with any school that has a lick of respect, whether it be from the SEC or a good conference or not. They're a top 10 team if they don't have the Indiana name next to them.
Absolutely. Bias is real, and it's negatively affecting the Hoosiers right now. There's no doubt about it. Don't know what to say about it other than I totally agree. It ticks me off. It ticks me off as well. So again, there are things that can, fight through it in that it's such a good story. I think more and more people will become more and more aware. And if you keep winning, you take care of that. That's the best thing you can say is if you keep winning, you take care of that.
And I do kind of want to move into, I guess, one other thing before I get into more big picture stuff. But the other game that worries me outside of Ohio State, of course, is that other road game that Indiana has to go to at Michigan State. Obviously, you're an Iowa guy. You saw how tough it was against Jonathan Smith's team this past weekend. Do you see Michigan State in a couple of weeks with the fact that it is, in my opinion, it's Indiana's first true, real road environment? Because you did go on the road with Northwestern in their weird stadium where you did have a lot of Indiana fans there because of Chicago. And then you played in the Rose Bowl, which, again, it's a road environment, but it's UCLA.
Sure.
Not that they don't have fan support, but it is, again, it was a road environment. But Indiana in 2 weeks, or I guess at this point, a week and a half, they're going to face their first real road test to me.
That's a great point.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that works for them. If they're able to execute, if they're going to be rattled at all. So it's going to be interesting to see that.
That is a phenomenal point. Can I ask you a question real quick? Do we know the game time for that game yet?
I do not. So they don't even, I think it's either noon or 3:30. They haven't decided between the two. So thankfully it won't be a night game if you're Indiana with that.
There you go. That is what I was alluding to right there. My podcast partner, Jordan, is a Michigan fan. He clued me in on a couple things that came true, which is Cade McNamara has never played well in that stadium, and that going into the woodshed at night is a completely different animal than during the day. So good on the Hoosiers if you're getting them at noon or earlier in the day. It's maybe not quite as loud of an environment. But with that being said, until I see a reason to doubt the Hoosiers, I will keep believing in the Hoosiers. My thing that I'm looking at here is, we've already talked about Curtis Rourke out, Taven Jackson in, and then it's Hoosiers, but it should be spelled HWO-shers, because Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton, Surratt, Cooper, Miles Price, Miles Cross, the entire defense, who are these guys? They all look the same, especially on offense. I swear they all like I swear they don't even switch the numbers. I can't tell, Ellison from Miles Price. They all look like a combination of a running back, wide receiver, type of thing. It's like a whole bunch of Debo Samuels. That's what Illinois looks like. And like, who are these guys? The Hoosiers. That's what I keep thinking about with these guys. So to me, I have so much trust in the whole offense and defense as a plan. Just saw one of your guys get interviewed on the Big Ten Network yesterday. He did a great job. You can tell there's just so much belief, with that team. So, Siggy's got him going. I feel confident on that. But every team could look a little bit different if you get a quarterback rattled. It would be awesome potentially if maybe Ward could come for that game if healthy, but we'll see.
Is there any true hole that you see with Indiana right now? And I know that they've played very well, but if there's anything that you can see that a team can exploit, what do you think it is?
That could exploit with the Hoosiers?
Yes.
Again,
so I know I'm putting you on the spot. I didn't.
No. It would depend on the team. I'll say this much: I had seen a couple, leaks, gaps in the armor, if you will, defensively. I'm still wondering if you really run into an offense that's a well-oiled machine. I would like to see how that looks. I don't know if you've faced an offense quite that good. You talked about UCLA. They were struggling on offense when you met them. Northwestern has been struggling all year. So as far as the road games, Michigan State would be a step up. Obviously, Ohio State would be a gigantic step up with that. So that would be the one thing. But offensively, I feel like the Hoosiers could score on darn near anyone. You don't get this deep in the season. With that being said, let's hope that Taven Jackson stays healthy, until Curtis Rourke comes back. Because if you're dipping into the third string quarterback in any quarterback room, you're probably taking a step back offensively at that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised with that as well. And looking more ahead to just kind of the big picture of the Big Ten in general. There's a lot of teams that are kind of vying for a spot in the title game right now. Of course, the unbeatens, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State. And then Ohio State and Illinois, kind of the other two that are not without question to be in that race. I saw somebody throw a scenario up the other day where there's a chance all of them end the season with one loss, which would be absolute pandemonium. And I mean, imagine 5 teams from the Big Ten getting into the playoff. I don't know if the committee would do that, but it'd be insane if that were the fact, or if that were to in fact happen. But what scenario do you kind of see playing out, at least from this point in the season?
The funny thing is, our friend Jake Myers of the Get Back Coach podcast, we have been throwing these scenarios out since the summer, because, we weren't getting the Big Ten scenario and how these breakdowns were. And then him looking at it from the eyes of a Penn State fan, he's like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and assume a loss to Ohio State as a Penn State fan, but look at the rest of our schedule. We could be 11-1. Oregon could be 11-1. Ohio State could be 11-1. We had been talking about that. Now you add in Illinois and Indiana to it. So there's even more cooks in the kitchen, if you will, to make this crazy. It'll come down to tiebreakers, right? It seems like right now Oregon has the leg up on the whole Big Ten, but it only takes one slip up for them. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's even back out, for the whole conference. So I don't know. Like I've been telling people, this sure seems to be the year where we needed divisions than any other time, where at least you would come down to 2, maybe 3 teams in one division, but you would have more of a probable round robin on how that would go. Now we've got 4, 5, 6 teams that could be up there vying for to get to Indy. And then the bigger question, John, that's even crazier. What would you rather have as a Hoosier fan? Wouldn't you rather go ahead and be 11-1, sitting firmly in the college football playoff rankings, miss the Big Ten title game, and essentially assure yourself a spot into the college football playoffs? That question will be had for whatever that it'll probably, I would guess, wind up being 3 teams. I would guess like the max that we would wind up is 3 teams at 8-1 in the conference and probably 11-1 overall. you would have that one team that's held out and they might be happy about it.
And that's true because at that point, you don't have to play that extra game. Yeah, you probably wouldn't get as favorable of a draw when it comes to seeding just because you aren't playing in that title game. But at the same time, your guys are sitting out for an extra week, getting to heal up if you have any major injuries, that type of thing.
Yep.
So there's definitely some benefits to being that team that ends up getting left out if you do indeed end up being 11-1 and in that tiebreaker scenario. So I don't know,
John.
I haven't really thought that deeply about it.
John, I believe that you and I are both glass half full type of dudes. You're probably a winner either way. You get to the Big Ten title game. That's historic for your team, or you get to sit out and stay healthy. There's not a bad option there, as long as we're assuming that third or fourth team in the Big Ten gets into the college football playoffs.
Yeah, because there is a real chance where if Indiana is 11-1 and they do make the Big Ten championship, there is a scenario where you're playing Ohio State for the second time in 3 weeks if that ends up being the way that it plays out, of course, which would be a very odd scenario to have happen, of course.
Which, as people have been suggesting, is going to be the case with Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, all along. Like this is going to be impossible, nearly impossible to avoid all that often. Here's another scenario I've thrown out as you were talking there. Indiana, how about this? Maybe you wind up 8th in the college football playoff. Guess what that means? You're hosting a college football playoff game in Indiana. Maybe a Southern Fried team has to come into blustery Bloomington and Memorial Stadium in the middle of December. I mean, there is just some realistic but extremely fun things to consider if you're a Hoosier fan right now.
And it's super fun going through these scenarios. One thing I've been doing every Monday, Jeff, is that I've been going through the CFP projections on where they have Indiana currently slated, depending on who you look at, and just talking about the certain scenarios that could take place, whether that be hosting a Kalen DeBoer coached Alabama team at Memorial Stadium, which just sounds like complete bizarro world, or, going down to Knoxville and facing Tennessee, something like that. Again, all of this is yet to play out, and we're going to see how it ends up playing out over the next several weeks. But right now, it's just fun to be a part of the ride that you probably didn't expect to be on, and I hope it continues to carry us into deep November. We'll see.
Like I said, these are realistic dreams. So until somebody tells you different, keep dreaming it. That's what I'd do if I was you.
Jeffrey the Greek from the Eyes on Big podcast. I appreciate your time as always. And when we chat again, I mean, it'll be the twilight hours of the regular season. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's happened between now and then.
Thanks for having me on. Always a blast to talk to you.
Love having Jeffrey the Greek on. And we'll, of course, check in with him again in a few weeks as the football season gets deeper and deeper into the regular season. And, the stakes keep getting higher and higher, especially if Indiana continues to win. I mean, they're already pretty much in uncharted territory. And that's not entirely true considering they have had seasons where they've started off this well, or should you just say one season if I'm not mistaken, at least since the 60s. Maybe there were some before then. But, I mean, once you get past the 8-win start, right? I mean, that's when it truly becomes uncharted territory if you were able to be 9-0 or even more than that. So it's very fun to watch, very fun to see all of this unfold. And as a fan myself, I'm looking forward to seeing if it continues to play out that way. So let's go ahead and dive into YouTube comments. Love seeing what you guys have to say and reacting to it. And again, if you ever want to do that, just check out the videos, the one you're watching right now. If you want to comment on that, just say whatever you want. I'll react to it. Try to do it at least once a week. If we get a bunch, I try to do it more than that, but I usually try to do this on Wednesdays just to react to everything you guys have said over the last several shows, especially if it's still relevant. And of course, one thing that I don't mention enough, just because I haven't utilized it very often, if you want to leave a voicemail, a voice message per se that you want me to play on the show, you can do that as well at 502-830-9195. And you can hear your voice on the show. And that's a fun way to do it as well. But let's go ahead and dive into some of these comments. I may or may not. I'll read as many as I can. You don't want to dwell too much on it and just start blabbering, but I'll read some of these. I'll probably go through a little quicker than others, but let's see what we got here. So Monroe County IU fan says, enjoy the deep dive into the postseason. Yes, the CFP projections going to continue to do that every Monday, as long as Indiana continues to be a part of that conversation. So, and yeah, that's very fun to do, and just kind of picture what those scenarios could be for the Hoosiers if they continue to look like a playoff team. So yeah, I'm glad you enjoy that, Monroe County IU fan. Mike Shenefield says, cannot believe it's number 38. And of course, this is number 39 now. I have been with you since number 1. How time flies. Mike, I appreciate that. And I know I love having day ones. And again, now I feel like I'm bragging on myself, but like for those of you who stuck around since day 1, and I know a few of you at least have probably heard of me from the previous shows that I've worked on, but I appreciate you joining me on In Touch and, giving me a shot to do my own thing. And I'm glad that you've enjoyed the shows so far. I hope they continue to get better and better. Leslie, so I do remember Leslie 3820, I should say, if I'm giving the exact username. I had mentioned on Monday that I hadn't seen the Mellencamp clip, and he or she responded, because I don't know if this is a boy or a male or a female Leslie. He didn't. I was talking about the F-bomb that Mellencamp dropped. I did end up seeing that clip finally on YouTube, and it wasn't as egregious as I expected it to sound when I heard that he made an F-bomb. It was a lot more casual sounding. But I do want to comment on this about the Mellencamp segment. It seemed very uncomfortable. And again, I'm not a big John Mellencamp fan necessarily of his music. I mean, he's really just before my time. Not that I don't respect anything that he's done. Maybe I'll eventually dive into his musical catalog. But he kind of seemed out of his element, at least for a little bit during his segment on Big Noon Kickoff. And the Big Noon crew kind of seemed like they didn't really know what to ask him at times, because he wasn't really giving them much to go off of. And, until the end, when he kind of went off the rails a little bit. So again, not really trying to take a shot at John Mellencamp. This is kind of my observations from looking at that clip. So we'll move forward. Justin Beard, 458. Maybe I'll stop saying the full usernames, because I mean, some of you, I know Justin Beard, that's just your real name. So, but he says some people predicted this team's success. That is true, Justin. Johnny Kruger dropped an F-bomb. Just already went over that. He says Signetti for president. Pissed off. Look, when we were up 40 points, he that is correct. Props to Dolson, the AD, and that's true. Like you couldn't have had a bigger home run higher than with Signetti. He's somebody that you took a chance on it, and so far there's zero regrets with that type of a chance. And yeah, so shout out to Scott Dolson. And I'm sure he's busy making sure that he's coming up with a plan for when we get to the end of the season on how to retain, somebody like Signetti. Or maybe it won't be as difficult of a job as we think it will be. Maybe he ends up being happy here. And this is, I mean, if you can build it here in 1 year, why restart it again? I mean, but again, maybe Signetti's somebody who's always wanted to coach at a blue blood. Who knows? But if that doesn't matter to him, why would he go anywhere else? So again, we'll revisit that conversation down the road. This next comment's probably one of my favorites that I've seen in a while. It's from Tanis. He says, told you we were going to beat them down. Rourke hurt his thumb shucking corn. If we had a sponsor where I could give like a comment of the day, that would be comment of the day, because I mean, yeah, if you don't take care of yourself when you're actually shucking corn, you can hurt your hand. I'm sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I sound like a dumbass considering I've never really shucked real corn. But yeah, the Corn Huskers, that's exactly what he was doing. He was shucking that corn and helping Indiana get off to a 28-7 first half lead. So yeah, good comment, Tanis. Appreciate that one. And here's something real quick. Andrew Jones says, if IU had Alabama on their jersey, they would be number 1 with a bullet. Now, maybe, I mean, I think there is truth to that for sure, because anytime these new rankings get out, I'm beginning to get more and more underwhelmed with them not making bigger jumps, because, and I will say this, disregarding the like, if they were Alabama, of course, they would have been a preseason top whatever team. But let's just say that it's an Alabama team that was not predicted to do as well, and they were further behind, right? They were unranked like Indiana was at the beginning of the year. That may be a situation where you see them jump continually higher without, having necessarily the marquee victory, because they have that SEC brand, correct? And so it really, like, what really aggravated me this week specifically, they only jump up 3 spots after dismantling what many people thought was a good Nebraska team. And maybe they are still good. I mean, they're 5-2 with their only other loss being to Illinois in overtime, and we'll see how the season finishes out for them. But if it was an SEC program that beat them 56-7, you absolutely would have seen them jump into the top 10, especially if they were 16 the week before. It's just really aggravating to see, because it makes you wonder how many people actually watched that game. Because if they didn't watch the game and they just saw the score, I guarantee you their first thought during their process of thinking was, oh, it's probably just a bad Nebraska team. Because nobody wants to give credit to Indiana because of course it's Indiana. I can fall into this camp sometimes myself too, whether it be football or basketball. There is way too much stock put into the tradition of a program when it comes to success today, right? Especially now that we're in this new era, especially it's been a few years now that we've transitioned into this new NIL transfer portal era. Like a lot of the stuff, and especially with teams with new coaches, like I know Alabama's still probably going to be fine with Kalen DeBoer, but it's not going to be Nick Saban's Alabama. And one thing that continues to drive me nuts, and it's going to continue to do so and escalate further down the road as they continue to do this as the seasons go on, is we can't always base everything off of what they were like in the past, right? Like this Indiana team has nothing, not a thing to do with what Indiana was in the past. Yeah, there's maybe a few players that are still left from last year's Indiana team or even Indiana teams before that. But that doesn't mean that they were bad players. They may have been, like, for example, Omar Cooper Jr., really good player that wasn't able to be utilized correctly because the coaching staff was mismanaging everything and not putting, the right systems in place to be successful. But the national narrative for any program is, or for any writer or pundit, whatever it may be, is like, oh, they're Indiana. They're eventually going to fall back down to earth. Okay. And maybe that doesn't mean it will happen for sure, but I mean, it could. It's just really, I guess, frustrating to see people just assume that, oh, because it's always been Indiana, they're eventually going to, they're going to take the mask off with the success and they're going to go back to being, what they were before. And if they lose Cignetti, that may be the case. But this is Cignetti's Indiana, right? This is what we're seeing. And the fact that he did it so fast further proves that. This is not Indiana. This is the Cignetti program that just happens to be working under the Indiana umbrella. So I hope I hope I was not getting redundant with all of that. It's just that's what the national people will always view Indiana until proven otherwise. So it's going to be an uphill climb. Maybe that would be the driving force on why Cignetti would potentially leave, because he puts in all this work and to get little national respect, at least up to this point. And again, it's the escalation of national respect has been more so than the early weeks, of course, but it's still not what it would be. If Indiana had the SEC brand next to their jersey, they'd get more respect, even if it was still Indiana. That's also a problem, and it's silly, but that's just where it is. It's where we are with college football. So I'll quit ranting about all that. It is something that drives me nuts, though. So we got one more comment I want to read, and then we'll get into some non-revenue shout-outs, and we'll call it a day. But Jamie Howie, excuse me if I mispronounce your last name, but I'm assuming that's what it is, says, something else to note. Not a lot of film to study to prepare for Jackson. From last season, yes, but this is a completely different system this season. That's a good point, Jamie. And I didn't chat about that with Alec necessarily. I'm glad you brought it up because, yeah, Washington doesn't really have a lot to go off of when it comes to what they can expect from Taven. And if they dwell too much on what last season was like for him, that may be a grave mistake for the Huskies, because I tend to think that what we've seen from Taven Jackson in his I was going to say minimal action this season, but it's kind of been more than that. He's had more opportunities than I think many people expected, thanks to the demolitions earlier on that allowed him to get some more snaps. And then, of course, the second half against Nebraska. But just even in those glimpses, I guess, if you will, of Taven Jackson, he looks so much more calm. He's way more accurate. I mean, I don't think he's thrown an inerrant pass all season long. And again, it's a fairly small sample size, but I don't recall any time so far this year where I've seen Taven Jackson throw a questionable football. So I don't see any reason, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, for fans to be nervous about Taven Jackson. Yeah, I guess there will be natural nerves to just because it's not what you've seen all year long. And there is going to be that added pressure of being the starter, as I mentioned previously. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle of all this weekend. Just get through the initial couple of drives. And if you're able to get a lead off of that, that's best case scenario. Because the rest can be, you can play more comfortable like you were able to against the Nebraska in the second half. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Glad you brought that up again, Jamie. It will be interesting to see how Washington tackles Taven Jackson. I'm not talking literally, like getting to him with the sack, but like how they decide to prepare for him. And I do think you're going to see them sell out on the run. I think early on you're going to see them they're going to want Taven to throw it because they're going to want to make him uncomfortable. Because Indiana's going to want to get the run game going themselves, because that, of course, opens up the passing game, as we all know. So I'm very excited to see what happens. I'm hoping to continue this journey of being unbeaten, because this is certainly a hell of a ride. And who knows? I mean, as long as Cignetti's around, you can expect it maybe in seasons to come. But if he's not, who knows when we'll see something like this again. So I'm going to enjoy it while we have it. All right, let's do some non-revenue shout-outs, and we'll call it a day here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Men's soccer, man, I keep seeing this. They're calling them October Indiana, because this is when Todd Yeagley teams have always kicked it into high gear, no pun intended. But they look like a totally different team than what we saw at the beginning of the year, at least in terms of results. This past week, they took care of business against Michigan State, won 3-1. And they'll continue to try to improve upon these results. They're going to be out in UCLA this Friday, and then next Tuesday back at Bill Armstrong Stadium to take on Northwestern. And again, they're hitting their stride at the right time, as they always do. So many, including myself, who thought they might be having an underwhelming year, which again, it's still not the best season you could have if you're Indiana men's soccer, but when you're clicking at the right time, it doesn't necessarily matter. They can still go on a deep tournament run and finish close to where they want to finish this year. So shout out to the men's soccer team. Unfortunately, for the women's soccer team and women's volleyball, there's not as much good news to report as since we've last checked in. We'll start with women's soccer. They lost at home to Bloomington 1-0, and then lost on the road at Minneapolis against Minnesota 3-0. And they were kind of the opposite of men's soccer. They were off to a really good start this year, and the wheels have just kind of fallen off, and that's unfortunate to see. They will wrap up their regular season on the road this Sunday against Nebraska in Lincoln. So hopefully they'll be able to finish the year off on a high note before they get going. I don't know if they'll be able to qualify for the Big Ten tournament or not. I don't know how that works. I may have to take a look at that here before we check in again next week. But yeah, unfortunate for the women's soccer program. And again, things not looking much better for women's volleyball. Again, it's a very tough conference, Big Ten volleyball is. But since we last checked in with them, they lost 3-0 against Illinois on the road. And then they had a rivalry game against number 10 Purdue that they also lost 3-0. And they will come back to Bloomington tomorrow. They're already in Bloomington, but they'll have a game in Bloomington tomorrow against number 8 Wisconsin, so things don't get any easier. That'll be on FS1 at 7:00, and then this Sunday they'll stay at home against Northwestern, and that'll be at 7:30 on the Big Ten Network. So there's your non-revenue shout-outs for the week. Hopefully things will continue to improve for men's soccer, of course, but hopefully the women's soccer and women's volleyball teams will be able to have good finishes to their season before the year's all said and done. So that's going to wrap it up for today's edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Of course, subscribe on YouTube to be notified of all things when they're posted, whether it be clips from this show or the shows in general, or talking about the Hoosiers podcasts, the post-game wrap-up shows with whoever's in charge of them going forward. I mean, it's going to usually be me, but this weekend, we'll get into more of it on Friday, but Drew's going to be filling in once again for me, hopefully for the last time. Again, things I already had set in stone that I cannot move, unfortunately. And as I've said before, I'm going to be watching Indiana Washington on Sunday after the game's already happened, which again, at this point in the season, I really hate doing that, but I really hope that it's the last time that I have to do something like this. And I think it will be, again, of course, unless Louisville stuff gets in the way. It's not what the situation is this week. It's just some other obligations that I already had committed to before the season even started, before I'd even decided to do this new show, In Touch with Indiana Sports. So again, didn't mean to get off onto that tangent just yet. I was going to bring it up on Friday. I'll have more details for you about it then as well. So again, subscribe on YouTube, leave a comment, leave a like, share the show if you like the show. Check out HoosierIllustrated.com as always with Kyler, Alec, Drew, and Dylan and all the things they got going up on a daily basis. And a lot of stuff coming out, of course, with basketball right around the corner as well. So be sure to check all of those things out. Give everybody a follow on Twitter or X if you happen to be on there. You want to know what's going on as soon as we find out. So until Friday, this has been another episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.